If you're familiar with our channel, you'll know that sometimes I get too technical for my own good, so every once in a while it's nice just to talk about mastering, share a chain that I like, and keep things straightforward. This chain only consists of 7 processors, with the primary goal to create an upfront and impressive sound while affecting the peaks as little as possible. For example, some processors like EQ and saturation negatively affect transients in unexpected ways, so I'll share how I work around that. Now, this is just a chain that I use for personal projects and tracks that I've mixed for friends. I say that just to make it clear that Sage Audio's all-analog mastering is approached differently. So if you don't enjoy this chain, please just keep in mind that it's not indicative of our engineer's approach. With that said, let's cover my favorite mastering chain and discuss why simple is better, at least in my opinion. First off, for inserts 1 and 2, we have simple EQ and saturation. So starting off the chain, I have some subtractive EQ and saturation that's set up to minimize unwanted artifacts. For example, the subtractive EQ is just a couple of filters, a side image high pass with a 12 dB per octave slope, keeps phase rotation at a minimum, while still focusing the lows into the center of the stereo image. A mid-image dip to the highs reduces some sibilance, and that's about it. Now, where your bell filter is centered will depend on your mix, and you may need a couple more filters instead of just one, but try to only change the spectrum where it's absolutely needed. Additionally, people think that only linear phase EQs affect transients, but all EQs do it in some way, so I try to use it as little as possible. For saturation, I'll use this multiband Saturn II processor. In short, I'll find the kick, the bass, the snare fundamentals, and isolate the range before saturating it a fair amount. Meanwhile, the high range has no saturation. Now, this keeps the harmonics more musical by only generating them from the kick, the bass, and snare, as opposed to sibilants, cymbals, etc., which can also result in some ugly distortion. Additionally, by only saturating lows, I don't need oversampling, since it's unlikely that one of the harmonics is going to go past the highest allowed frequency, which, as you know, would cause aliasing. Now, oversampling is useful for that, but the linear phase filter that it introduces affects transients. And for these 2 reasons, this setup creates the best sounding saturation, at least in my opinion. So let's take a listen to the A/B of these 2 processors. Keep in mind that the genre that I'm mastering here is more punk, so some additional distortion is part of the expected sound. That said, this chain will still work for most genres, and it could be used with subtler settings if that's what's needed. For inserts 3 and 4, I'm using maximization and then some more maximization. So I really enjoy the sound of taking quiet aspects of the mix and amplifying them through maximization. It creates more detail by reducing masking to these quieter parts while increasing the overall loudness. Meanwhile, the peaks are left unaffected. Now, I came across this free MasterDesk plugin, and I thought I'd never use it. It's marketed as one of those achieve a Pro Master in 1 minute types of plugins, back when developers were trying to do that. Although I don't think that the marketing is true, the plugin is still impressive, and it adds enjoyable imperfections to the track. The frequency response becomes more indicative of classic hardware, with some unique boosts and cuts, and some more significant attenuation to the highs. Additionally, subtle variations in the left and the right channels add a unique sound. The harmonics also include modulating noise, similar to dithering, reducing the dynamic range, but also the perception of quantization distortion. And then tone and foundation allow for some subtle tone shaping, in other words, some very mild and broad changes to the frequency spectrum. Finally, maximization is built in, as is a mid-side matrix that allows for alteration to the stereo image. Now, you'll notice that I don't change much from the original settings. It has a really cool sound without much tweaking, but it works better as part of a chain than as one processor attempting to cover all bases. So next up, the majority of maximization is caused by Omnipressor, which is one of my favorite plugins. I don't even engage the compression and the expansion functions. Simply inserting the plugin on a mix maximizes the overall signal by a few dB while imparting a strong third-order harmonic. It's really simple, it brings up quiet details, and it doesn't affect my peaks, which is great since I want a loud sound without sacrificing transient detail. So let's listen to these 2 processors being enabled. Make mixes that accurately translate what you hear in your head without years of practice or expensive plugins. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy Award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy Award-winning artist Toulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating mixes that look like this when you can instantly fix the problem by working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? Watch this entire video, and at the end, learn how you can start making mixes that accurately translate what you hear in your head. For inserts 5, 6, and 7, I have my final EQ, final maximization, and then limiting. So with the mid-side EQ, I'll shape all of the processing that I've introduced so far. Some of the lows bled back into the side image, but a subtle 6 dB per octave high pass on the side image helps keep those focused. I'll dip a little of the third order harmonic added by Saturn II and Omnipressor to reduce its masking effect on higher ranges and to just generally balance the sound. Next up, a little stereo expansion to the mid-frequency range goes a long way. It takes the most info-heavy range and it opens it up slightly, providing some needed complexity to the side image. Then a little air is introduced with a high shelf to bring up some of the lost details in that range. Sonic's Oxford limiter comes next, but I use it not for limiting, more for maximization and some harmonic distortion. The maximization itself is pretty simple, but the harmonics really fill the spectrum. A question I get a lot is if the inflator is identical to the limiter's enhance function. They're very similar. Enhance is the same as the inflator when the inflator is set to a curve of 50. However, the harmonics caused by the inflator are higher in amplitude in the lows and much subtler in the highs. Meanwhile, the enhance function on the Oxford limiter sounds more balanced with some emphasis on high-frequency harmonics that really tie the high range back into the song's root note. Now this just leaves us with the final limiter to protect from overs and also subtly shape some peaks. Now since I've used so much maximization, I barely need any attenuation with the limiter. With this mix, the limiter is attenuating up to about 2 dB if not less, which is almost imperceptible. However, the integrated LUFS is about -8, meaning I could use even less limiting if I wanted to. Since it's doing so little, almost any limiter will work here, but Elephant by Voxingo has very little effect on the sound of the transients. And if I am noticing any changes, I'll go into the settings and tweak the attack and release shape parameters until I get the right mix of control and transient retention. Now channel linking is kept higher to retain mono compatibility, and 2x oversampling is needed to reduce some aliasing, but overall, the plugin isn't working too hard. It's simply there to limit on occasion, not smash the peaks so that I could bring up all of the quieter details. I've already achieved that through maximization, so it's not really needed at this point. Let's take a final listen to the before and after. Let me know in the comments if you're going to try out this chain, and also let me know if you have any recommendations that I could try out. Make mixes that accurately translate what you hear in your head, without years of practice or expensive plugins. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy Award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy Award-winning artist Toulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating mixes that look like this when you can instantly fix the problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? We've helped 2,346 clients make mixes that accurately translate what they hear in their heads without years of practice or expensive plugins, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description and get direct access to us for custom analog mastering, one-on-one mixing feedback, in-depth mixing and mastering courses, and our thriving community. Click the link in the description now to start making mixes that accurately translate what you hear in your head.